This podcast is brought to you by Infinite Resources, a local staffing agency connecting diverse job candidates in central Iowa companies.
Amplified.
Peace, y'all. It's Deron 360 Richardson again. The podcast is Brothers Gonna Work It Out, wherein I explore masculinity from an Africana perspective, Black masculinity, personal evolution, artful thinking, living. And all that said, the podcast is not about what you think it's about. I know that's mystical and mysterious, but it's true. With all that said, yeah, I do not believe in my heart of hearts that this is about what you think it's about. So anyway, today's topic is we lie to ourselves a lot more than we wanted to admit. And I came to this conclusion. I think it's something that we all understand. It's not a deep thing. We understand kind of the ways that we betray ourselves. But this notion became more acute and more clear when I was reflecting with some friends yesterday just about how I lied to myself at a time where I may have been my most capable, not in life, but capable for the moment, where I showed up for the moment. And in that moment, I didn't realize I was doing as well as I was doing. I hadn't taken like an inventory of my wins or my capacity more so than my wins. Because I don't know if you know if something's a win until after the fact, especially when you're talking about what's known as like infinite games. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But in a game where there's an end, there's a win, and you don't know you've won until it's over. And so I think about this particular time in my life and how, it was some potential wins going on. I was doing a lot, but not realizing that I was doing a whole bunch and doing it well enough to survive, doing well enough to thrive in many instances. And so I told myself a lie at that time about my my capacity, my agency, my ability. I told myself a kind of fairy tale about myself that didn't really comport with who I actually am. We have a tendency to do that. I'm gonna take a break to talk about that. Like we have a tendency to do that. We have a tendency to talk about ourselves in terms of like some of our old patterns, even if it's something as simple like just something that we just didn't prefer to do 10 years ago or whatever. But we have a tendency to say, "I am not that," and we bring it into our identity in such a way, we invite it in and allow it to take up residency in us in a way that I don't think is always productive, in a way that I don't always think is true. I think it's a lie when we get caught up in some of these patterns. And again, like to illustrate, like the patterns could be something as simple as like just things that you don't think you normally do, like things that you don't necessarily normally eat or whatever. But like I've heard people say all the time, "Well, I'm just not, I'm not a good singer, or I'm not good at organization. I'm not good at all these things." And I find that interesting when it sort of becomes an identity as opposed to an actual measurement of your capacity. And if we know anything about identity, it's that identity is fluid. It's something that you make up. When you're born, yeah, you got some genes and you've got some things that can influence how nurture, how the nurture part of nature and nurture affects you. But identity is fluid. It's you make these things up as you go along, based on inputs, based on sheer happenstance, accidents, things that scare you, things that empower you. All of that feedback helps you create the person that you are, among other things. But it's just interesting to me when I think about how easily we make something an identity based on so little so little evidence, like just a handful of repeat behaviors on our own behalf. When we say, "Oh well, since I did that a handful of times, it means I'm not good at that," or listen, that works the other way. That's all cuts both ways. Where you've been successful at things a handful of times, maybe it was dumb luck, maybe it was whatever. Who knows? And you think that is who you are. You bring that in and give that residency, and that's a part of your identity. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that, like, and this isn't the point of this particular episode, but it helps. It helps. I think it helps flesh out the idea. The point is that identity is fluid. Get comfortable with that notion that it is a moving thing. It is not a secure thing, as much as you want to tell yourself that. Uh, and differentiate what you've told yourself about yourself as your idea, as your like identity, and like an actual measurement of what you're good at or what you've done, what you're capable of. Not potential, but like what you're capable of. And those are different things to me. Those are different things. Your capacity, what you've demonstrated is your capacity is different from what you just kind of think of yourself, this image of yourself, this persona or set of personas, like this team of personas that make you who you are. Something to think about. That's, and then I guess we have the intro. I guess that's the intro. I didn't mean to get that deep on the intro, but you know, 7 episodes in, this is how we're gonna do it. Yeah, so no reason to start at the beginning, so and I didn't start at the beginning. So why do that? So I've been thinking about the setup. Setup, then there's some conflict, and then we have a resolution at the end of the podcast. So the setup is this. Uh how I lied to myself at my most capable. It was like it was Iowa State University. I was returning to Iowa State to finish off my bachelor's of what would become my bachelor's of fine arts. I was married at the time. I am not married now. Uh, it's like we're thinking about let's take the 2007, 2009 period around there. I was working at Hy-Vee full time, I would say full time ish. Sometimes 30 some hours, but really pushing it full time enough based on when you think about the other things that are going on in my life. Yeah, you're like, yeah, you would say to yourself, yeah, that's full time. So working full time at Hy-Vee, um, 3 babies under 4 years old, one of whom was dealing with by that time period, dealing with sort of the fallout, the hangover from having a severe neurological condition and the treatment, which I would argue was more intense and more damaging and deleterious than the condition itself. So yeah, one baby dealing with that, and doing and for me, I'm doing the most at that point in time, and I knew it. I knew I was doing the most, and I remember being in conversation with my dad, and he knew I was doing a lot. A lot of people, I think, from the outside looking in as spectators, looking at this, this finite game, another like asterisk on that one, finite game that I was participating in. The game was to go back to school and finish and get the degree and, say what you will about a college education and all the implications. the benchmark, the slaying of the dragon of doing that. That's what that finite game was all about. So I'm on the phone with my dad, and I referred to just life at that time as like one crisis after another, or just like riding the crisis. It's like, well, he's like, "Hey, how's it going?" And I respond something to the effect of, like, "Yeah, it's a crisis, an ongoing crisis, but I guess it feels good. It feels like I'm working it out," which is hilarious. I kind of chuckled at the time because I framed it in that way, not realizing like in that moment, like I was lying to myself and telling myself the God honest truth at the same time. Like I said, described it as a crisis, which is honest, but I was lying to myself about what the term crisis means. Yeah, a crisis can break either way. Like that's one thing that's embedded in the meaning of the word crisis. Is like it yes, it's a challenging situation, it's hectic. It's often goes bad. On this sphere, this globe that we're on, like if there's a crisis on the other side of that thing, frequently people are worse off for whatever crisis happens to them. And so there's something that was like pregnant. That word crisis was pregnant with a truth and a lie at the same time. I was honest in describing it because deep down, even when we don't know language, we're not using language correctly. We kind of do know everything that eh, we do. We do know. We have the sense of language, and crisis in that moment was totally accurate. But me thinking that crisis just kind of meant something. Oh, I'm just juggling plates. It's just hectic. Um, that was the lie. That's how I lied to myself. That was the first lie. Let's put it that way. That's the first lie I told myself, that it was a crisis, but it wasn't like a crisis. But listen, in retrospect, it was a crisis. I was doing a lot. I was doing a lot. There's a lot going on. There's everything that I listed. And then in my senior year, huge relationship issues with my ex wife. Like the kind of stuff that pushes you to the brink, like splits the family up, the brink of divorce. And this is like, if my son's here, this isn't a surprise. You know, we're all in on this together. So it doesn't, that's no news flash. But yeah, like my senior year, my real senior year, um, as opposed to like my fake senior year when I first went to Iowa State and dropped out. Um, yeah, the crisis is multiplied, and there's everything that comes from a crisis, a breakdown of sort of order, expectations, norms. There's fear. There's just, there's just a lot, a storm of emotions. And I think in that moment there was something about the other side of that, like right around graduation time, when everything seemed to sort of converge and come to a head, and I really had to reckon with like the threat part of the crisis as opposed to like the sort of the exhilarating part of the crisis. And I think, yeah, this is the time to draw a little bit more shape around the word crisis again. Crises. Is that right? I don't know. Um, they're exhilarating. They can be exhilarating. That's for sure. The adrenaline rush, sort of those primal fight or flight, freeze, all the those mechanisms that start to inspire you and push you in ways that you didn't even realize, like it's like an extra engine in you. Like, yeah, that exists. But sometimes in crisis, that drops out, and you realize, and you're just there with your stuff. And that kind of happened right before I graduated. You're kind of sitting there with all of the things, like all the everything where you're like doing the most, like you're looking at it like as an inventory, but you didn't take the inventory. It's like somebody dumped it like a dump truck in your living room, on your living room couch. And then there's no time to lie anymore. No time to say, "Oh well, it ain't a crisis." But yeah, then you're like, "Hey, this is everything is coming to a head now. Every plate that was spinning is wobbled, and now you see it as opposed to seeing the whole thing. You see each individual issue." So that's the setup. That's where we were, doing all that stuff and all that stuff. And mind you, there for all of the crisis, nothing broke beyond recognition in that moment. It's something to stick a pin in. Nothing broke beyond recognition. Yeah, that's just something to remember. So all that's happening. You got the school full time, you got the work full time, you got the working to maintain family balance with three babies under four. You've got serious relationship crisis toward the end. And you've got sort of a near collapse. Everything's at everything's on the balance. Everything's at the cusp of breaking one way or the other. Am I going to finish school or not? Is the family going to stick together or not? Am I going to maintain my sanity or not? That was up for grabs as well. All those things are questions, and they're really a flick of a coin. It seemed like in the moment that you could flip a coin and it could break one way or the other. But we held it together, whatever that means. We held it together in the moment. So, what's the conflict? Besides that, what's the conflict? Well, let's finish this off. I don't want to leave you on a cliffhanger. So, to finish off the setup, I wound up getting my degree in summer of '09 from Iowa State University, a bachelor's of fine art. Uh, the family in that moment reconfigured, reconstituted itself, and we decided to stay together. We decided to make it work. And we use that in a lot of ways. We use that energy to sort of buoy us over the issues that happened post 2009 for a handful of years. And so, in that particular point, at that particular stage of life, that it sounds like a win, doesn't it? Like that's like the win of the infinite game. And now would be a good time before I talk about the conflict. Now would be a good time to talk about what I mean when I say infinite and finite games. And I probably said infinite where I shouldn't have said infinite or something like that. I can't remember. It's just pouring out of my head right at this point. So there's this cat named James Cars. James P. Cars wrote the book Finite and Infinite Games, A Vision of Life as Play and Possibility. Sort of a philosophical, theological, even epistemological book epistemological, one of my favorite words, something to remember every time you listen to this. Epistemology is how we know what we know, the sort of the study, the observation of like, is that, do you know that? Oh, you do? Like, how did you do that? How do we do this? What are knowns? And how do we do that? So anyway, this is about that. And it just divides finite and infinite into two groups. Like, and I'm gonna keep it really simple because I've talked about it before and I'll talk about it a lot. Finite games are games that have boundaries, rules, and whatnot, and there's clear ways to win. It's not up for grabs. It's not kind of playful or intuitive or ambiguous. Infinite games are games that you play to keep the game going. To quote Cars directly, a finite game is played for the purpose of winning, an infinite game for the purpose of continuing the play. Spoken by the author. So there was a win. So back to the setup. I considered that period of time a win. With all of the crisis, juggling all of those things, I did consider it a win once it was all said and done. You keep the family, you keep the girl, you keep the sanity for the most part, and you get the degree. A win, right? Yeah, I guess. Yeah, sure. But how did I lie to myself in that moment? The conflict. Well, even knowing deep down that that was a dub, the lie I told myself, even through like the process of getting the degrees, like how many assignments are you gonna finish? I always had this thing that I like talk about a little bit. It's like the sort of like a fear. I don't know if it's a fear, actual fear, but a fear or inability to finish. So kind of get projects like right to the edge, get like all the stuff and feel really good about that stuff, and just can't quite do the get the deliverable, like finished, done. So I've been telling myself that. I told myself that after the fact, even though I had finished a thing, that even though that win was something that I could relish in and mark as evidence. And in a conversation, I'm just going to interpret, I'm just going to like weave in other stuff. Like, and in a conversation that I just kind of loosely refer to as like honing the blade with one of my dear comrades, Chet. We just talk about gratitude for evidence. I wrote that note in a conversation with him where I just am grateful for evidence and remembering evidence of who you are, evidence of your capacity, of your capability, of your value. Grateful for that. So anyway, the lie. Told myself I couldn't get done. I was still, this is post 2009. I was still telling myself, man, you're not really that guy. And who's that guy? The kind of guy that does the thing. Like shows up when they need you. And it wasn't like it was totally unreliable. I felt like the people that loved me and really needed me. Oh yeah, I'm reliable. But that reliability was really to myself because I had told myself that I am destined for great things. Who knows what those great things are? But it's real. I have to be honest. I'm being honest with you right now. I told myself that I'm destined for great things. Not because somebody told me that I'm great, but I felt like I was one of millions of brothers that just had to be great. You just had to do it, not just for you, but for your community. For my mom, as a repayment for, being a great single mother, for my family, for my aunts, for my uncle, for my grandfather, my grandmothers, all that extended family. And really, now that I think about it, pause for a second, like, was my mom really single? I don't know that I believe that. Like, single with what? Like, language means things. Like, single in what way? Like, totally by themselves? By herself? No way. You can't be yourself. Matter of fact, let's reference Karst again. This is useful. It talks about where is it? I'm not gonna quote him directly because I can't find it in the interest of time. But anyway, he says something about selfhood being impossible without community. And so, can you really be a single mom if you've got family? If you've got somebody helping you, if you've got anybody, if you've got inter, interlocking souls there to support you, like, that's not to say it's not hard. It's not to say that it isn't a deficit when it comes to like real hard resources, be it time, money, those things, absolutely. But just because my dad was in one place, 900, 1,000 miles away from my mom, and, I saw her way more than I saw him, that I don't think that that's single. But I digress, as I always am, or hyperlink, as I like to call it. Anyway, the lies. I wasn't doing enough. Isn't that weird? I told myself that lie. And I don't know if you're doing the same thing, but I'm just trying to be honest about that, just in case you're anyone who's listening is doing the same thing. Told themselves that they're not doing enough. Or that they're not enough, or they're not that person. And this was like shortly after I had done the most in my life. And even the following years, when I think about maybe 4, 5 years, I think about reading journal entries from like 2014, and I don't journal a whole lot, so don't feel like you're less than, like I'm a super journaler, because I'm not. Anyway, I'm thinking about the next, say, for instance, 5 years, and then within the span of that 5 years, I'm still thinking to myself, man, when am I ever going to get over this hump? When am I going to be a great, great artist? Am I going to just like use this BFA? When am I going to just be better as a dad and all this other stuff? And so, knowing that win was just like a handful of years prior, I'm still thinking about how, still lying to myself and saying that I wasn't doing enough. Like, what is that curse? Is it the curse of like being young, gifted, and black? Is it a universal curse? Like, is it humanity? Of course it's humanity. And I'm gonna say this like I say it. Hopefully, I've said this before. I don't have like a Rolodex of, or I mean, like I don't remember everything I've said in my podcast. But I'm going to say this again, like, the black experience is not so particular that no one can understand it. As a matter of fact, it's like a part of my creed, my way of understanding the world is that being a person of African descent and going through the experiences, this long, long memory, this long journey through time and space, doing this, being something, being a particular ethnicity, being a bunch of ethnicities combined, going through it, degrees of struggle and cataclysm, being told you're nothing, and then through that process of affirming and asserting not only your realness, your humanness, but asserting your divine right to exist, your value, your capacity. That process in and of itself is valuable to every single human being. As a matter of fact, it is one of the main paths to humanness. And it's a humanness that is aspirational. It isn't a default humanness. It isn't looking at, you know, a Homo sapien baby and saying that that little critter is a human. No, not a default thing. This is a thing that is aspirational. It is what we say when we say humane versus inhumane. When we say the inhumanity versus humanity. And that's something different. That's something different than just default human. So to be young, gifted, and black, what does that mean? What's the pressure? What's that pressure? There's a pressure on all gifted kids. There's memes going around right now of like kids in the 80s and late 70s, early 90s that were like told they were gifted and talented, and like how big of a waste or how much of a sort of an unnecessary yoke that was to designate kids that way, because they end up being burnouts because they think that they're like Loki from MCU, that they're burdened with great purpose when they can't just be themselves, be useful. Because like, what does gifted mean anyway? Like, gifted with what? Like, I'm gifted because I like to draw a lot. When I was little, that's why I was recognized for art, IQ tests and shit like that. Like, what is that? What is that burden? The burden of being like internalizing your young gifted blackness as like the special juice, the special endowment that helps you be the superhero that saves your people. And what kind of fallacy is that, to think that like just because you have these things that make you think that you're extra unique, not just unique like everybody's unique, but extra unique. What is it about that makes you think that like you are responsible? You're personally responsible for saving your people. What a delusion. Again, to reference Cars, no selfhood without community. Like, in a lot of ways, sort of the mythology of like doing comic books and superhero stuff, because each superhero is such an individual. It's like sort of this fallacy around like you being such a particular person with a very particular gift, be it changing into rock or turning into flames or, whatever, being able to teleport. Like, they very, 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 very specific thing and very individual thing. And that realization of your selfhood and your ego and the expression of your ego, that's the way to save humanity. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in that. And I don't believe in the philosophies that spring from that. What you bring to the team is important, because you can't have everybody doing the same thing at the same time. You can't all have the same skills. Some people need to focus and specialize if there's a particular objective. Because if everybody is absolutely identical, then you don't need as many people. And most tasks need more people. So that said, selfhood, that especially that particular ego-driven, like gifted selfhood, is nothing without people to contribute, a team to contribute to, a family, a community, loved ones, comrades, people, camaraderie, people. I referenced that in the previous podcast, like being able to go through shit together and try to maintain coherence and cohesiveness. That in and of itself is dope. So that curse, I was just thinking about that curse. Maybe that's it. Maybe that had me delusioned into thinking that I could never be enough. I don't know. But all I know is that it was a lie. I know it was a lie to tell myself that there's only me. Then only I, like Smokey the Bear, only you can prevent forest fires. Only I can save, myself or save my family. Like only I am not doing enough. Like if I was just doing more, I would feel better. I would feel more fulfilled. But that's, yeah, I lied to myself. I was doing enough. I was doing the most. I was doing a lot. And that became a running theme. And only now have I been more honest. I'm an honest person. I do pride myself on just being uh if not just brutally honest, be I pride myself on being introspective, at least having honest conversations with myself. So, posing the question and allowing myself the time to come up with an honest answer without running away from it, without equivocating and doing a rope a dope, knowing myself, checking in. Like, wait, do I still feel that way? Do I still, is that a real thing for me? Or is it just something that I was telling myself? It was just a lie that I was telling myself. That's something that I've always prided myself on. But now even more so, I'm able to ask myself really, really hard questions and be vulnerable enough with me to answer in a way that's honest because I'm not afraid of the consequences of telling the truth. And that's really like that's why we lie. We lie to other people for that reason, but we lie to ourselves for that reason. When no one can hear in there. It's just you and your thoughts, you and yourself and your notions and your feelings and all of that stuff. And yet, we're afraid of the consequence. What is the consequence? What is the consequence of lying to ourselves? Or telling the truth, I guess. I know the consequence of lying. What's the consequence of telling the truth? Shit. Embarrassment? Like seeing a version of yourself that doesn't comport with that version that, the funhouse mirror, maybe you're looking in a reflection of yourself that's the funhouse mirror and sometimes it's like in a way that like you think of it as maybe grotesque, but there are other ways where that funhouse mirror distorts you, maybe make you look taller than you are if you want to be tall or shorter or whatever. So there might be things that you're looking at that are reflecting an image of yourself that doesn't necessarily balance with that honest appraisal of yourself. And maybe that's why. Maybe that's why we lie to ourselves. Because we don't want our ego to be bruised. We don't want to look at ourselves and see the actual reflection, but think that it's a grotesque funhouse mirror. Kind of like that uncanny way that you look at yourself when you see a mirror image of you. Like which is ironic because that's how people actually see you. So the norm when you see yourself as you, it's like, oh wait, that's straight on. Like that looks weird. It's because you're used to looking in a mirror. You're used to looking at a reflection. And so something's just uncanny about that. Something a little off. Like the symmetry looks funny, but it's just a reverse. And maybe that's what we're afraid of. We're afraid of being honest. Now, me, I don't know that I was afraid of being honest. I think I was just confused. And at some point along the line, based on particular choices in life, patterns, habits, self-destructive habits, um, unmanaged, like sort of like disappointment, stress, sadness, being unable to transmogrify or translate sadness into its proper material. That's the thing about emotions. They're like these resources, and if you don't convert them properly, if you don't send them through the refinement in yourself properly, then they wind up being something else. They wind up being incredibly harmful or just inert and useless. And so, those things, the inability to process those properly, maybe that's what it was for me. But I do know that I spent a lot of time lying to myself, and that lie was this. It was that you might just be a fuck up your whole life. That's the lie that I told myself. Not that like you're capable of juggling all these things at once, and you've overcome all of these different things in life, and like you've not only survived but you've thrived, and like people love you and you love them. I wasn't telling myself that. I told myself it wasn't enough. Just lying for no reason other than there are a brittleness somewhere in me. Yeah, a part in there that was just brittle, that couldn't stay together, that wasn't certain. And this is another excerpt of a conversation from honing the blade with Chet. We talk about certainty and how admirable certainty is, and not 100% certainty, but just having things that you are certain about, just something. Have something that you would, I think Chet said, run into a building for, that would you burn up for, die for, some certainty. Those are the pillars of a strong existence. And man, I am grateful for that. I'm grateful for having certainty because it has really changed my relationship with myself and how I talk to myself. Because I certainly don't lie to myself anymore. That's for sure. For one, I don't have time. I've become acutely aware of time and the kind of clarity that I want on my deathbed and wanting to walk with that. Like to wake up and go to sleep and move through life and all of those moments with the kind of clarity that you would have on your deathbed. And people, man, don't people. You ask anybody that works in elder care, that works in hospice care, people, they let it loose. Even if you have dementia, I've heard. Even if you have issues like cognitive issues, things that would like deteriorate areas of your brain. There's something about like those secrets that you kept or those lies that you told about yourself, like telling the truth toward the end. And I don't know when the end is for me. I have no idea. I can never know. But I do know that I would like to move like it could happen at any moment. And I'm getting better at that. I'm getting better at that every day. Move like it could happen at any moment. And not just your behavior, but like in the head, in the mind, certainty. Like if I had to lay down now, what things am I certain? What are my confessions? Like the 42 negative confessions. What things haven't I done to defile the river or to, because they don't describe Ma'at as, it's not described like sins, but just a quick description. Ma'at is ancient Kemet, what's also anglicized as Roman, Greek, who knows? Anyway, Egypt. Ma'at is the ruler of the scales. And so at the end of a life in Egypt, you measure your heart versus the feather. And in order to maintain that balance, you want as many negative confessions as possible, confessions of things that you haven't done, right? Or, Even you can extend that a little bit more in the after, or things that you've fixed. Because some things, there's some bills that can't be unrung. So yeah, deathbed clarity. I don't have time to lie to myself. So what have we learned today? Make sure I'm going over my notes, make sure I didn't forget anything that I want to share with whoever is listening. We've learned that, like, from my references to Chet, my conversations with Chet, my people, my comrade, and all my other comrades, take notes. Don't just take notes in school in like sort of these large curated institutional experiences, but take notes in your heart to hearts. Your community is there for a reason. They've got something for you. Take notes. Talked about evidence earlier and being grateful for evidence. Look for that evidence. You scrape for that and you grab that evidence of you being that person, you doing the thing, whatever it was, even the small wins, even the ability to stick to a diet for like 2 or 3 weeks or whatever it was, or the things that you learned, the books that you've read, the conversations, the ways that you made people feel. Remember that. Write it down if you can, but also search your memory banks. Look for that evidence. Grab hold of it. Apprehend it. And express gratitude for it. Otherwise, without that evidence, you're wandering and you may end up like me, lying to yourself about your capacity. Telling yourself you'll never get it done. Or you're not that guy. You're not that gal. You're not that person. You're not that human. And lastly, let's go back to that fear of finishing, if you have that, or even if you don't. I invite you to play more infinite games. The kind of games that are for the purpose of continuing the game. Not the purpose of winning or competing against another person, when collaboration would have done a much better job at accomplishing the objective anyway. What else? Another one. Number your days is what the homie Chet said. Number your days, and that fits very well with the whole deathbed clarity. It's the same philosophy. Because the work that you do, that you do will not be complete until you're gone from this earthly coil anyway. So keep playing those infinite games. Keep playing the kind of games, doing the kinds of things that you can do for the sake of doing them. Keeping the community together because you can do that. Loving people and being loved because that's not finite. Because you want to keep showing up and doing that. Because once you're gone, that's when the work's complete. So yeah, those are just thoughts for today, this month. I'm sure there's more, but we can't have an infinite podcast. That's for life, an infinite game. Peace, y'all.
This podcast is brought to you by Infinite Resources, a local staffing agency connecting diverse job candidates in central Iowa companies.
Amplified.